Hello, my name is Afradu Salmon Mijage from Edukea Tanzania. Welcome in this session to proceed with our topic number 16 in Form 5 History, which is the influence of external forces to the rise of nationalism and the struggle for independence. So let us see another part. As on the last session, we ended on the contribution of the Second World War to the rise of African nationalism. So now we are going to see the Bandung Conference. Bandung Conference and its role in the rise of African nationalism. So the Bandung Conference was opened in Bandung City in April 18th, 1955. To mean that the Bandung Conference was opened or conducted or held in Bandung City in Indonesia on April 18th, 1955. The conference comprised of 29 Asian and African nations. The presidents from Africa who attended this meeting were from Nigeria, Ghana, Libya, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Many of the African presidents, sorry, there is repetition of words here. Many of the African presidents who attended the conference were members of the non-allied movement, or so-called the NAM. To mean that the many of African presidents who attended the conference were the member of non-alignment or non-aligned movement, NAM, which was formed in the same year of 1955. The Bandung Conference demonstrated the determination of these nations to voice the independence of Africa in international affairs. It also declared that all forms of colonialism and its elements must be removed and called the colonialists to give political independence to their colonies. We are proceeding. The Bandung Conference influenced the development of nationalism in Africa. In Africa in the following ways. To mean that the Bandung Conference influenced the development of nationalism in Africa in the following ways. So we are going to see the roles of Bandung Conference to the development of African nationalism. The first one was encouragement of young freedom fighters. To mean that the Bandung Conference encouraged the young freedom fighters. It encouraged the young freedom fighters in Africa to fight for independence. To mean that the Bandung Conference encouraged the young freedom fighters in Africa to fight for their independence. And the members at the conference realized that there were some European countries that were not ready to grant independence to their colonies, hence the freedom fighters had to fight for independence. So the Bandung Conference played a role in encouraging the young freedom fighters to fight for their independence, especially for those European countries which were not ready to grant the independence for the Africa. Another was it means educated the nationalists. Mean that Bandung Conference provided education to the nationalist fighters or nationalist fighters. It educated young nationalists on the tactics to be used in order to succeed to attain independence. To mean that Bandung Conference provided educational teachings to the nationalists or the young nationalists on the tactics and the techniques could be used in order to succeed to attain their independence. For example, they advised the nationalists to form political parties. The political parties would unite all the people and fight against one common enemy, that was the colonialists. So the Bandung Conference advised the young nationalist struggle or fighters on forming the political parties and the political parties would unite the people of the respective country to unite the people and fight together with the common interest of attaining the independence and remove the colonialists or the enemy colonialists. Another, the Bandung Conference provided a forum or the platform for the African countries to discuss their grievances that were caused by the colonialists. The conference provided a forum where nationalists from Africa could get moral and material support from Asian states. The forum also made it possible for the African nationalists to meet and discuss strategies that can be used to attain independence. So you can see the Bandung Conference played a lead role to provide the forum for the African countries to discuss their grievances that were caused by the colonialists, and Bandung Conference or the Asian countries were provided the moral and the material support to the African countries during their struggle for the independence in Africa. But another was advice, meaning that the Bandung Conference provided the advice to the African nations to fight for their independence. It influenced the nationalists not to take sides with any ideological camps of capitalism or socialism as the best way to achieve independence. To mean that the Bandung Conference or the conference that was held in Bandung, Indonesia, that led to the formation of non-aligned movement, as they agreed that neither to support capitalism nor socialism. So the Bandung Conference influenced the nationalists not to take or to choose the side which must be supported by them. So they were supported not to support either capitalism or socialism as the best way of getting the independence in early stage. Siding with one camp would provoke hostile relations with other camps thus during the independence struggle. It means that by siding or providing the support on one ideology, either capitalism or socialism, could bring the hostility or could provoke the hostile relation with other camps that could delay the attainment of independence in African countries. So that was another contribution of Bandung Conference in the lives of African nationalism. But another reduced the influence of the USA and the USSR or Russia, Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. It means their influence was reduced by the non-allied movement as they were not supposed to support either capitalism or socialism. It reduced the support from Russia and the USA since they were not defined on which ideology they will follow after gaining their independence. The two powers were ready to help African nationalists because they wanted independent African states to follow their ideologies, and as will be the main aim or way of exploiting them, or in the way that to attain the area for markets, area for investment, and raw materials for their industries. But the non-allied movement was reduced the support from Russia and the USSR as to reduce the influence of those superpowers of the world to support the decolonization process in Africa in order to reduce that catastrophe that could lead to the delay of the attaining of the independence of African states. But another one was the use of constitution means, to mean that Bandung Conference discussed and addressed that or told the African countries to use the constitutional means or peaceful means in the struggle for attaining their independence. It influenced the Africans to use constitutional means to fight for independence, though in some colonies it failed. The constitutional method was possibly mainly in British colonies which did not have settler economies, but in Portuguese colonies as well as French colonies, force had to be applied in order to attain the independence. So you can see that Bandung Conference was influencing the Africans to use peaceful means, as the constitutional method was possibly mainly, or was possible mainly in British colonies, while in other colonies like Portuguese and the French colonies was failed. So there was the use of armed struggle. Another was unit. It means that Bandung Conference provided or addressed the unit among the African countries on struggling for their independence. The conference stressed the importance of unity among the Africans when fighting for their independence. Unity would make it possible for all Africans to join hands to fight against a common enemy, that were colonial rulers. And the last one, that the Asian countries gave moral and material support. It means that the Asian countries that attended the Bandung Conference were provided the moral and material support to the African countries in fighting for their independence, as we saw that the countries like India, Burma, and Pakistan were provided the material and the moral support to the struggle for the African independence. So these were the role of Bandung Conference. Let us see the role of USCCR in the lives of African nationalism. The USCCR adopted communism after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 under the leadership of Lenin and Stalin. The strength of USCCR reached its climax after the Second World War, which enabled it to consolidate and expand a communist ideology in the world. The USCCR played a significant role in the lives of African nationalism. It means that USCCR, or Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, was played a great role to support the African countries to fight against the colonial rule and to attain their independence. As after the Second World War, the communist ideology of the Soviet was reached its climax and became the super socialistic country in the world. So let us see the USCCR played a significant role in the lives of African nationalism in different ways, as the first one was ideological support. Many of African nationalists adopted Marxist theory as a tool to fight and oppose capitalist exploitation and oppression. It means that the communist ideology or socialist ideology were explaining on the methods or the evils of the exploitation of capitalism ideology, exploitation and the oppression of capitalism ideology. So many African nationalists adopted the Marxist theory, which were discouraging the capitalism and capitalism exploitation and the oppression. Karl Marx stated that it was possible to dismantle capitalism. This line of thinking inspired the African nationalist movement to fight for independence. It meant that Karl Marx was the Marxist scholar who stated that the dismantling or the elimination of capitalism was possible. So this line of thinking inspired the men of African leaders to fight against their colonial rulers to attain their independence. So that's how USCCR contributed to the rise of African nationalism. Another was alternative for capitalism. To me, that socialism provided the alternative for capitalism, as it clearly exposed the evils associated with capitalism, which was characterized with exploitation and the oppression of man. Providing an alternative to capitalism increased the momentum of the African to fight for independence, as the men of the colonial powers were following or were under the capitalism ideology. So the socialism provided the alternative way of making the Africans to understand or to realize the evil that were associated with the capitalism that was characterized by the personal exploitation and the oppression of the African resources. So providing of that alternative to capitalism increased the momentum towards the Africans to fight for their independence, and that's how USCCR, or Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, led to the rise of African nationalism. But another was material and moral support. It means that USCLR provided material and moral support to the African countries. The USCLR provided material and moral support, not all, and moral support to the African nationalist movements. It provided the guns and the uniforms and the advice to the movements that playing a vital role in the struggle for self-rule. It means that USCLR provided the moral and material support, for example, guns, uniforms, and advice to the African nationalist movement towards the fighting against the colonialists and to get their independence. So you can see that USCLR took some personnel from Africa in order to teach or to provide some teachings or military teachings to those soldiers that would be used in fighting against the colonialists. Another was the use of the veto power. It means that USCLR used a veto power on pressurizing the capitalist countries to grant the independence for the African countries. It means that the USCLR used a veto power in the United Nations to help African nationalist countries. The Security Council was dominated by capitalist powers such as France, Britain, and the USA, who wanted the colonial rule to stay in countries such as Angola and Mozambique, so as to protect South Africa. The Soviet Union used their veto power to make sure enough pressure is put on capitalist powers to grant independence to the African countries. So that's how USCLR pressurized the capitalist power as by using a veto power in the UN or United Nations for those countries to grant the independence of African states. Another was provided scholarship. It means that USCLR provided scholarship to the African personnel. The USCLR provided scholarship to African nationalists to study in Russia, and studying in Russia led to the political awareness among the nationalists and equipped them with the necessary tools to fight for self-rule and government. The nationalists were also given military training, which was essentially in an armed struggle, which was essentially used in an armed struggle. So you can see USCLR provided the scholarship to Africans who were going to Russia to study, and they come up with awareness on political matters, and the nationalists were well equipped with tools that could be used to fight for self-rule and government. And the nationalists were given the military trainings and the techniques which were essentially used in the armed struggle for some African countries who got their independence through armed struggle or guerrilla war, like Mozambique and Angola. Another was establishment of class alliance. It means that the USCLR introduced the class alliance. The USCLR established the class alliance with the revolutionary forces in Africa to end colonial rule. In Angola, Russia transported the Cuban forces with the force of the movement People's Liberation of Angola to defeat UNITA and the fascists, which enabled Angola to regain its independence in 1974. So these all were the contribution of USCLR to the rise of African nationalism. And the last part is just the role played by the independent Asian countries, Burma and India. Role played by independent Asian countries, Burma and India, to the rise of African nationalism. It means that India was got independence in 1947 and Burma in 1948. The independence of India and Burma inspired the nationalist activities in Africa, because after the Second World War, a number of British countries which were under British colonial rule, India and Burma being among of them, got their independence. So this was the spirit that inspired the African people to fight against the British rule or British colonial rule. to get their independence. The demise of British Empire in Asia are the following significant to the decolonization process of Africa or in Africa. So you can see that how independence of Burma and India led to the rise of African nationalism. The first one was Africans were motivated that they also become independent because these nations were under colonialism, but they managed to get independence, and why not African countries? It means that the Africans were motivated that they could fight those colonial masters until to get their independence, because even those Asian countries, Burma and India, were under colonial rule under the British, but they fought the war and the independence was attained either through peaceful way or armed struggle. Another was African nationalists such as Kwame Nkrumah adopted Mahatma Gandhi's tactics used during the struggle for independence, like mobilization of masses and the use of non-violent means of achieving independence. You can see that the African nationalists such as Kwame Nkrumah was adapted the Mahatma Gandhi's tactics or technique during the struggle for independence, as the Mahatma Gandhi during fighting for their independence, where he used the mobilization of the masses of the majority in the nation and the use of non-violence method to attain their independence. And that's why some African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana used that method to fight for their independence. Another was some African nationalists even copied the term Congress to their political parties. It means that some African nationalists even copied the term Congress to their political parties. That Congress was used or was almost used in Asian countries like Burma and India, and that Congress was provided the inspirement, or it means that term inspired many Africans to fight for their independence. Another was these Asian countries acted as the nerve center for coordinating struggle for independence of Africa. For example, during Bandung Conference, which took place in Asia, in Indonesia, in the city of Bandung. It means that the Asian countries acted as the center or coordination center for coordinating struggle for independence in African countries, especially the Bandung Conference that was held in Indonesia as regarded as the Asian country. So the many African countries leaders were attended that conference, and they were well equipped with various ideas and techniques which could be used to fight for their independence. But another one was these Asian countries offered, it means these Asian countries like Burma and India offered moral and material support to the African nationalists during the struggle for independence. For example, they provided scholarship studies before example, they provided scholarship for African nationalist leaders, liberation techniques, idea of forming political parties, and etc. To mean that you can see how Asian countries like Burma and India were provided moral and material support to the African countries on how they could liberate them there from colonial domination. So you can see that the scholarship was provided to the African nationalists concerning with the liberation techniques and idea of forming political parties, which were all means of using during the fighting for their independence. And the last role of the independent state of Asia, India and Burma was to encourage the freedom fighters and masses to fight for their political independence countrywide, and by teaching African nationalist leaders political education. It means that the Asian countries, India and Burma, encouraged the freedom fighters and masses to fight for their political independence countrywide. It means that throughout the country, and to teach the African nationalist leaders the political education, means that was concerning with the political determination in African leaders. So the Africans were well equipped with political education the freedom fighters were got the technique of fighting for their independence countrywide, all throughout the country. So that made the African countries to gain momentum in the lives of fighting for their nationalism. So I would like to say that this is the end of our topic as our syllabus showing us. So I would like to thank you for being with me until the end. So before winding up, I would like to give you some revision exercise or some revision questions which will involve